Welcome everyone to Nerd of the Rings. We have a very special guest with us today, Mr. Doug Adams, the author of this wonderful book. If you don't have this, you should definitely have this on your shelf. It is the music of the Lord of the Rings films, and it is an absolutely delightful book. We'll be talking about it plenty during this interview, I'm sure. But Doug, thanks so much for taking the time and joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to do it.
Now, I like to start people off. The first question I always ask is, how were you first introduced to Tolkien?
First introduced, it was probably when I was a little kid. I think I want to say it was every springtime they put the animated Hobbit on
Yeah.
TV, the Rankin Bass thing. And I think I would start that. Was it on it was like Easter time or something. I seem to remember
Really?
always being sometime when I was on a vacation from school, so I could stay up later. And I'd always start this thing, and every year, I'm gonna get to the end to see how the story goes. I don't think I ever got past Gollum until I was in middle school. It was always just too late. I was tired, and it got a little scary, and I kind of gave up on it. But I always liked it. I was always fascinated with. I grew up in that era of I'm dating myself here, but it was like the era of the late 70s and early 80s with all that. There was so much storytelling, all the myths new myths that we were being exposed to at that time. And I think I immediately recognized that it was kind of oh, this is one of those stories that I like to watch where everything, this character comes back and this character comes back and this is going to be important later. And I understood that type of storytelling, and I suppose the hero's journey type of thing and all that stuff. And that would have been my first exposure to that. I think later, I must admit, my brother was a better reader than I was. I was the music kid, so I was the kid walking around with headphones clamped on all the time. And my brother read The Hobbit and read Lord of the Rings, and I think gave them to me after that. And that's probably where I first became familiar with them as literary works.
Yeah,
I think like many things in my life, it probably began as a cartoon and then kind of went on from there.
that's awesome.
Yeah. And I did eventually finish the show, by the way. I don't know how long I was, but I finished The Hobbit.
That's good. I was wondering,
yeah.
Have you still not finished?
Story, yeah.
You know how it ends? Okay,
yeah,
good.
I'm okay.
Now, obviously, you have a lot of experience with the Lord of the Rings films. You work closely with Howard Shore. So how did that come about? What was the process there that led Howard to bring you on board?
When I was an undergraduate, I was a music student, and like I said, I grew up all these stories from my childhood. So there was a magazine that came out around the time called Film Score Monthly. It was basically just a print magazine. I think it was like somebody my age. It was basically publishing this as Xeroxing magazines of their college, their dorm room at Amherst or something like that. And I think I discovered it through some liner notes to something and said, I love film and TV music. I love this stuff. I bet I could do this. I'd listened to that type of music when I was a kid. Like my musical upbringing was very, the standard classics were very hand in hand with modern or semi-modern film scores. So I was learning my Mahler symphonies and learning my Williams Star Wars scores at the same time. So they never really kind of felt like there was that big of a difference in intent, but not difference in quality. So anyways, I thought I could probably try writing something for this magazine because I like this type of music. So I wrote them a letter and said hey, I'm such and such, and I'm studying music. And it turned out that most of the other people that were working on the magazine were coming to it from a film angle. They were film fans who then went on and liked the music as sort of an artifact of the filmic experience. So they said, well, hey, you're a musician. We're going to give you these composer interviews. Why don't we set you up with these interviews and see how these go? And of course, I was over the moon because these are like the rock stars to me.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to go back and hang out with Mahler and Beethoven, but you can be sure that Bruce Broughton and David Shire and these great composers that were working, they were sure accessible.
Yeah.
So they started setting me up with these interviews, and I think they went well, and they kept giving them to me. And one of the interviews, I think by this time I was in grad school, and I got asked to interview Howard Shore about a film called Copland, which is a film thing. Yeah. James Mangold, who just did the Indiana Jones film last summer.
Yeah.
And he and I got along very, very well. I did find I did really enjoyed the interviews, but every once in a while I would kind of feel that bristling of my uh, chatty Midwestern nature, and I was getting a lot of composers from New York and Los Angeles, and it's a different energy, and I'm
It
sure
is,
that's you.
yes. As a fellow,
Yeah,
Midwestern
yeah,
boy, I totally get that, yep.
and like I was trying to chuckle my way through the interviews, and they were very serious, and we always got along great, and I think they appreciated that. Um, I spoke their musical language. I didn't want to do the old Chris Farley sketches where I would just say like, that scene where you had the trumpet solo, that was really cool.
Yeah,
I could talk about the musical content, and I think they liked that. But I got Howard for Copland, and he's a Toronto fellow, and Canada and the U.S. Midwest maybe have more in common than I do with like a
yeah,
hard-bitten New Yorker.
absolutely.
And we got along great. We're both kind of falling over one another to apologize to each other for anything that went wrong.
Right, yeah.
Um, and he's just such a brilliant musician and just a clever human being in every possible sense. And I mean, the stories that he has. He was the original band leader on Saturday Night Live. The first time I ever
Right.
talked to him, I had a phone number to call him. Call him, interview 7 p.m. Okay, call him 7:10, 7:15, 7:20. No answer. I keep calling. Finally, he calls me back around 7:30. He's like, "Oh, sorry, I was on the phone with Al Pacino. I had to do a thing." Like, oh, okay. But we got along very, very well. And then I think I was already doing most of these composer interviews anyway, but I think I became sort of the Howard Shore interview guy. So he
Mm,
had a project, and I would speak to him about it. And so it was a couple years down the line, and I was interviewing him for a score to the film called The Score. It's a Frank Oz heist film type of thing,
yeah.
with a great sort of jazz influence score. It was really cool. And I knew at this point that he was doing Lord of the Rings. I think an announcement had come out very close to the time I was interviewing him.
Yeah.
But at this point, like I started to learn from all the New York and LA guys, well, you got to be professional. You can't just kind of go, "Are you doing Lord of the Rings?" So I didn't say anything. I kept it all quiet and focused on the matter at hand, which was a
Mhm.
fantastic work and deserved the discussion and the attention. And then at the end, we had gotten familiar with one another. He'd call and get my parents on the phone and stuff because, like I said, I was in grad school, so he kind of knew the family. It was like Uncle Howard was calling, and at the end of the interview where we just came to sort of chat, said, I just signed on to do these Lord of the Rings things. So I go, I know, I'm trying not to say anything, but I know. And he said, I think this is going to be a bit bigger than usual. This might be something special.
Mm,
I'm like, well, we're kind of all hoping that it is. That's
yeah.
what we would like. And he said, um, do you want to maybe stick around and see if there's something we can do together on this? And I think he had this was like May of '01.
Mm.
Or no, yeah, May of '01. Yeah, because it was the year Fellowship came
The
out in
year
March,
Fellowship comes out? Yeah.
like the spring before that. And he had recently been down in New Zealand, and he kind of saw all this documentary work going on, which
Yeah.
would eventually become the behind the scenes documentary.
Appendices, yeah.
Yeah, the appendices, yeah. And I think he wanted to, maybe there could be something focused on music, but that same idea of what if it's somebody that speaks the musical language and can kind
Yeah.
of do this in the sense that I'm comfortable with. I've since become like a unmanageable insomniac, but I think that was the first night I ever didn't sleep through the night. I didn't sleep. And it was like it was so sad because all these little things that were keeping me up were like the smallest, pettiest dreams. Like maybe I could write like two sentences for the liner notes for the CD or something. This is back in the era of physical releases, of course. Um, and I had these tiny little ideas, like maybe they'll let me do this and it'd be so cool, and it'd be so amazing. And if I had known what truly lay in store for me, I don't think I would have slept for a month because it became
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
much more exciting and so much more expansive than anything I really imagined. The rest of that summer came and went, and it was very quiet. And of course, the tragedies in September of that year. And
Yeah.
at that point, I kind of felt like, boy, I don't know, like everything, the world's going crazy, and
Yeah.
I haven't heard from anyone for a while. It's probably just you know, I'd been in the fringes of showbiz long enough to know that some of these things happen, some of these things
Mm.
don't.
Yeah.
And in October of that year, I got a package in the mail from Abbey Road in England. There's a little note inside and said, for your ears only, let me know what you think from Howard. and it was the score to Fellowship. And it wasn't, I mean, it
Wow.
was weeks, months away from being released. I think it was still actually probably parts that were still being recorded at that point.
Wow.
And I put it on, and it was bewildering to me because it was so different from anything we had heard. Uh, I mean, Howard speaks his own musical language anyway, which is
Mhm.
not to say he doesn't do, the major and minor and all the things that we need to know as musicians. But he has such a unique and individual voice and an individual expressive power. And I put it on and just kind of thought, wow, what is this? And then again,
Mm.
and again, and again. And it was just on constant rotation. And I was humming it when I wasn't playing it. And I began to realize, wow, there's really something here.
Yeah.
This is not just, you know, movie of the week, put it in theaters and entertain people for a couple.
Right.
And then shortly after that, I must have dropped him a note and said, oh my gosh, Howard, this is beyond anything we were expecting. And he said, well, why don't you come out? Let's talk about this. Come out to my studio.
Mm.
And of course, then another sleepless night. And I'd recently been in the area. His studio's in New York, and I recently had been in that area with my brother just for like a fun trip. And I thought to myself, why? I was like 10 miles away from where his studio is. I've got the courage to do this. So it was just very,
Yeah.
it was like my own. I know everybody makes a comparison. Everybody who worked on these films was like, I felt like Frodo because I had to have these adventures for the first time. And I think a lot
Right.
of people had that experience. Like we were all kind of, I was younger than most people that were involved in any way with those films other than I guess the cast. But everybody did kind of feel like this is the first time I've done something like this. As awesome
Yeah.
as it's fallen on my shoulders, I have to expand my comfort zone and
Mm.
learn more about the world. And that was my part of it. It's like, well, I'm gonna start doing some traveling. I went out there, and then I went out there again later in the spring, and went out there in the summer, and it just became this constant rotation of going out to visit Howard, and we would sit and watch the films together and listen to the scores, or he would give me the conductor score. A
Mhm.
conductor's book of music has everybody's part in it. You can see what everybody's doing, and it's really the only way to study a piece of music in that way.
Mm.
And since I've begun to publish film music, they haven't published Lord of the Rings, but they've published film music where you can get the full scores. But back then, you couldn't get them anywhere. They were locked in some
Mm.
studio archive. So it was shocking to see, like, this is what a film score looks like. Nobody's ever seen this. I mean, I guess you could go to academic campuses, but still, it was a big deal, especially for something that was like currently in theaters. Like I'm reading,
Yeah.
it still was marked up with his red pencil from the recording sessions. And they just kind of went on and on and on. And then, like anything else, you kind of continue your adventures and you meet more people, and you eventually win the trust of these people, of this weird pale grad student kid that keeps hanging around Howard. He seems like he's legit, like he wants to do something. He's not stealing our movie and putting it on
Right.
what do we have back then? Like AOL chat
I was
rooms?
gonna say, yeah, it was not as much as we have now.
Right. How far would I have gotten anyway?
Well, I remember it being a big deal, the number of downloads that the trailers got back then.
Do you
So
remember the original Mega trailer or what was that first thing called? Or it was like it was shots from all over the films, and it was like it still is like AOL stamped on the bottom.
yes, yeah, it does have
I
AOL.
don't remember what it was called. Yeah. And then like by the end of it, I was being invited to the recording sessions in England, and went over there for an extended period of time to watch that. They plop you down in the chair next to Peter Jackson in the recording studio, and you just kind of go, "Hi." And he was the most polite guy in the world too. I can remember they recorded those scores in Watford in England.
Hmm.
And at one point, the mayor of Watford was going to stop by and kind of honor everybody with his presence. And I was sitting in his chair, and it was because they put me next to Peter Jackson, and I was just okay, I sit here and I watch. And he turned over to me and said, "Hey, Doug, I'm so sorry, but would you mind? The mayor of Watford's coming by. We kind of need that chair." Like he was in the middle of doing Return of the King, and the highest pressure of all three, possibly, because you have to stick
Yeah.
landing, which is always so hard, and he was just still so polite. So I guess the New Zealand personalities may be close to Midwestern and Toronto in some sense, right?
I have made that comparison too.
Yeah,
So
okay, there you go. Yeah.
I that's some validation for me, because I've made that, and like there's so many people I run into that are from one of the coasts, and I'm like, I think this is a a good comparison, and
Yeah.
so that's good that
And
we're
I
on the
don't mean to
same
slander
page.
either of the coasts, because I certainly have dear,
Oh,
dear
yeah,
friends in
no,
New
no,
York
of course not.
but yeah, it's just, you know, we
There's some similarities where we get each other a little bit.
right, there's
Yeah,
something in our blood at some point.
yeah.
We are where we were raised. But so in a short story long or long story short, that's kind of how I came to be involved, and that continued through Rings. Howard and I did a little bit of work together on Martin Scorsese's Hugo,
Mhm.
between the two trilogies that he did in Middle Earth, and by that point, I was ready to go back. We kept joking that we spent so long doing all the CDs and the book and everything in Lord of the Rings that we were kind of the last ones left in Middle Earth at that point. We went to go
Oh, yeah.
reach for the light switch and go, that's it, we're done, we got it all, and then here comes
And then
pack of
everybody comes
dwarves
right
knocking
back
at the
in.
door, and we're back to it. Yeah, so,
Now, so you mentioned seeing the film. So did you then presumably saw the film before it was actually released and everything?
I
Like,
did, yeah.
so
Well, that's I should say that's more true for Return of the King than for the other two.
okay.
The studio is still a little cagey with Fellowship. Two Towers, I saw like a press screening like a month and a half early, which
Oh,
was
okay.
wildly early. But Return of the King, I actually was there as it was being, you're most of the scenes of Minas Tirith, it was about waist high to some guy with gaffer tape walking around.
Right.
But yeah, I saw all those. Yeah.
Oh, very cool. So
And
what
alternate openings and things like that. You kind of watch them shape everything.
yeah. So, but the score for Fellowship, obviously you heard that way in advance.
Mhm.
What was your thought? I like picking people's brains, who got a sense before like the rest of the world that
Mhm.
something special was brewing. And so at what point, you mentioned that you listened to the score and thought this is something different. Like this could be really special. What was it like, you know, that feeling of like, I know this thing might be huge and nobody knows it. Yeah.
Well, some of it was confusion, I think, at first, and
Mm,
I don't mean that in a negative sense in any way, but we kind of all had an idea, this is early 2000s, so let's
yeah.
say it was, like, kind of coming out of the late '90s, right? And we had this idea in our heads of what blockbuster movie music sounded like.
Yeah.
We had all these people that we grew up with, your John Williams, James Horner, Jerry Goldsmith, the people that predated that from Miklos Rozsa, Max Steiner, people like this. Um, so we knew it was very musically nerdy. This is why they hired me to do this stuff, right? But it was all related to like a late 1800s, early 1900s orchestral type of sound.
Mm,
And people love to go through and pick out like, well, this passage sounds like Strauss and this passage sounds like Stravinsky. Like, okay, well, that's fine. They sound like somebody else as well. Um, but Howard came at it from such a different angle. He didn't do that sort of late romantic orchestral sound that
mm.
people had done for a long, long time. His music was more, I don't know. It was hard to even know who to compare it to. There were touches of uh Sibelius in there. There were touches of chant that went back hundreds of years before the Romantic composer.
Yeah.
There were just Howard Shore isms, if I can coin a silly term. Um, it just didn't sound like anything else.
Yeah.
And so my first reactions to it were almost self-doubt in a way of going,
Mm.
I think this is genius, but it's so far off the beaten path. Like, it's under my skin. Is this gonna be something that I'm like banging the walls about in 20 years ago? No, it's great. You didn't understand.
Right.
Um, but I think it was like the greatest relief is that like, oh, I was right. I have my
Yeah,
thing.
like, I wasn't crazy.
Yeah,
This is actually brilliant. Yeah.
yeah. It was beloved by all. Because like nobody wanted me to sit around and analyze it if it was like a mediocre score.
Right, yeah, yeah.
We talk about, oh, this great thing for the elves. Like, who cares? Um, So yeah, there was an element of bewilderment, and I guess, I mean, everybody has sort of like imposter syndrome in music, anyways.
Mm,
Like we always think anything we do that's successful, we go, oh, we got lucky this time.
yeah.
But like when you're a music student, holy cow, your imposter syndrome is off the chart because you haven't done anything. So I kept thinking like, well, I've just got weird ears. Like this is just
Right.
something that's appealing to me, and then no one's gonna care. And yeah, it was just so. It had so much depth and so much
Mm,
ingenuity, and it was so utterly unique that you just kind of went, how is this a thing?
Yeah.
And I think that it maybe is similar to the way a lot of people reacted to the films, because it was sort of commercially positioned as, blockbuster, blockbuster.
Right.
And then it came out and it's this myth with all these resonances and languages and,
Yeah.
you know, care taken with costumes and the dirt and the fingernails and the chainmail. And people kind of went like, is someone just gonna like get out a sword and chop up the bad guys? Like,
Right.
where's that? Is that what we're going to?
Yeah.
Where's the damsel in distress?
Right. Yeah.
Um, and it was so much better and so much
Yeah.
more like, it's a very grown-up way of telling a very, youthful story, and I don't mean a childish story, but like a story that is an excellent guide for young people, of like
Yeah.
I said, how to enter the world,
Yeah.
and I think the score was hand in hand with that as well, where it starts
Mhm.
small by Tolkien standards,
Yeah.
and expands, and it's just I can remember some of the music nerds, back at the time said, well, like, "Well, if he's gonna score those ring wraith characters with that sort of music now, what's he gonna do by the third film? It's already so big and powerful." And then when that third film came out, I just kind of felt like, "Oh, that's what he's gonna do."
That's what he's gonna do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
how about that? So yeah, there was just a lot of like, how can it be this good?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, do you have a, looking back on the different themes and everything, do you have a favorite, or is that, like, really hard to choose between?
It's really hard to choose between, and the themes are done so interrelatedly
Yeah.
anyways. You know, it's like, as you go through life or even sometimes go day to day, you relate to different characters in
Yeah.
that film. Like, there are certain times of the year where I'm like, "Oh, I'm a hobbit, I wanna stay inside, I don't wanna leave my house, I don't wanna do anything, I want creature comforts and nothing else." There's times where you feel like an elf, where you're like, "Well, I wanna have the best aesthetics, and I want things beautiful, and I wanna control my environment." There's times where I feel like the, mankind, where we're just susceptible to base instincts and
Yeah.
maybe more self-doubt than we need. And I think the same thing happens to me, uh, with the thematic content. There are times like, I should also mention, the deck is sort of stacked with all those questions because, a lot of these themes are so important to my own life experiences.
Mm.
So when I hear the Shire theme, yeah, I mean, the first thing I think about is the lush green Shire and Baggins.
Right.
But I remember what I was doing when I first heard that. I
Yeah.
remember
Yeah.
walking into, the airport to fly to New York by myself for the first time. And I
Mm.
remember all these things that were kind of, meeting the people that would be an important part of my life down the line.
Yeah.
So it's a little, I guess that's egotistical.
There's extra layers to it for
Yeah,
you.
I mean,
Yeah.
so much of my life was for all those years was revolving around these properties and these beautiful scores that you kind of feel personal connection to them. I
Yeah.
love the simplicity of the Shire music. I love the folk instruments and how they integrated into the orchestra. At the same time, the fall of Baradur at the end with that. I
Mm.
mean, I don't know that film music, opera, symphony, anything has ever gotten more grand than that.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess it's the relationship between the two, the differences between the scale of the two and the impact of the two, and any of those extremes that are in the score. I
Mm.
think those type of things, they all bounce off of each other and create something beautiful. So that's the worst
Yeah.
possible answer to your
No,
question.
that's good.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
As you were talking about, how different ones will, and when you first heard them, how you'd find yourself like humming different ones. I don't know what this says about me, but I oftentimes will find myself humming the Isengard theme as
Oh,
I'm
no,
like
no.
walking around,
Don't
and
tell
I'm
me
just
that.
like dun 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 dun. Dun.
That's true,
It's like
yeah.
it's just so good.
It's good driving music, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So like I don't
I
know
get
what
the
that.
history of the ring stuck in my head all the time, and I
Mm,
don't think I've ever told this before, but I had the hardest time figuring out where the beat was, where the pulse was in that line.
ah,
Dun, dun, da, 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 dun, dun. That third note, was that on the beat? Did it precede the beat? Dun, dun,
mm,
da, where is that one? And I would just run it over my head over and over, because this was when in the very early days too, before I had made my trips to New York, I had to write out all these themes by ear,
Yeah.
which is something you learn in music school anyway. So I kind of felt like this is like my ultimate graduate project, like kind of writing out this score without anything to reference it. And that was like a great learning experience too, to see all these little lousy little sketches I made, and then I went out and was given the printed music. I guess, oh, I got that. I didn't get that. Um, yeah, so things like, I mean, that's a super dorky music talk, but that was the
Yeah.
kind of stuff. I should show you here. Actually, I don't think I ever brought this up. When we did, oh, here we go. When we did the Hobbit films. Sorry, good shot of my arm
Well,
here.
now we see the poster in the background of your
Oh,
book.
yeah, I'm
That's
supposed to.
great. Yeah, we didn't
I'm
see that
advertising.
earlier.
This is a commercial venture, darn it. When I did the Hobbit films, I had a little notebook that I carried with me where I would sketch out all the themes,
Oh,
because I had access to the scores as they were being written.
yeah.
I could sort of, where's my camera? I could sort of write these things down as I went. And, that one we were doing the liner notes while the films are still coming out. So we really had
Mm.
to have the themes all understood and pinned down and named and everything during the production, which is a different challenge. I made up a lot of like silly placeholder names for things just because I was trying to keep track of what things were. And a lot of these like secondary and tertiary themes that are in the score, I just call like, this is the skip beat ostinato, and this is the, just like little things to help jog my memory.
Yeah.
And then I would go back to Howard's office and I see that they'd gone through the scores and labeled things in the scores like skip beat ostinato, descending spirits. And I thought, oh no, they're stuck now. We can't get rid of these. Because like, he was using them internally with his office staff. Like, oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
That's good stuff now. So yeah, a lot of these things that sound very I don't know, not academic, but very cut and dry, very, very
Mm,
bland. Those are the names were just sort of like, we got stuck using these. These are what we're using.
yeah. Do you remember, were there any themes that, originally, like, I know the book actually comes with, a CD of, it's called the Rarities Archive, if anybody's curious. It's in the back of the book. There's a nice little holder for it. Are there any themes that, had different options or like almost turned out really differently that you find kind of interesting looking back?
Yeah, the Ent theme was going to be a lot more abstract at first. It
Mm,
became almost sort of a just a little motif of like, there's two notes played together, and the next beat, one moves up, one moves down, that type of a thing. And it used to be a longer, more winding line,
mm.
and it was very almost avant-garde, maybe closer to the type of avant-garde gestures you hear in like Shelob, but not the same,
Oh, okay.
not creepy music like that.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was very textural, very, very long and winding. And that would have been quite different, I think. Trying to think of other ones that like the Shire theme sort of had a bunch of variations, but they're all sort of in the same vein.
Mm,
Um, I think some of those came back in like end of Return of the King, some of those sort of
okay.
early concepts for the Shire.
Yeah.
Um, but a lot of them, it's interesting when you write a theme, and I think at least the way that Howard writes them, it's kind of, you don't, they rarely would throw out anything wholesale and go like, well, this
Mm,
theme doesn't
yeah.
run. Like they knew they wanted something kind of Celtic sounding for the Shire and for the
Hmm.
Hobbit. So you start with a da 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 da, and then maybe it wanders off in a different direction.
Yeah.
Um, so rather than just going, well, we don't like that, start over, they would go, the opening is good, and then I feel we want to bring it back
Go a
around,
different
focus it, and
direction.
shorten
Yeah.
it up order. So like it was very rare that anything would just go out the door. It was always, they say that composition is not painting, it's sculpture, and
Mm,
it's very true. You just knock off bits until you have what you need this theme to be.
yeah.
Once in a while, it's painting, and you just kind of go, "Oh, yeah, start over, new canvas, new canvas." But most of the time, it's just shaping what's already there.
Now, the book, I read online on your Wikipedia page. We all know
Oh,
Wikipedia
God,
is never wrong, but
yeah,
online on Wikipedia, it says it took you 10 years to write the book. Does that sound right?
yeah, yeah.
I wanted to
I'm glad
I
that I
wanted
get
to
it
fact
right.
check.
For a long time, I think my Wikipedia claimed that I liked to like to go skiing with the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers too. So I think
Oh,
at least this one they got this right.
that's
I mean, I think we dated that from the idea of me coming onto the project in
yeah.
2001 with that initial call, and then I don't know. I think we started using the term book around uh, I don't know around later that year or something. And then the book, what did it finally come out in 10, right? So it was yeah, a good decade of putting that all together. Now,
Yeah.
some of that, in fairness, it did. You know, we were doing the liner notes for the box sets and things like that. So it wasn't like I was just like hunched over a computer,
Right.
nothing to show for
For
10
10
years.
years.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did something, you know, I got some um, but yeah,
Well,
that's pretty
it's
accurate. It's a lot of
it's a marvelous book, and again, guys, if you don't have this, even if you are even remotely interested in music, and, I'll say this again, like, it's a fantastic book even for folks like me who are not musically inclined. You could say I'm musically deficient. Like, I like listening to it, but I don't know much other than that. Like, it's so bad that one of my friends, as I was reading this and, like, researching and, just going down the rabbit hole of being interested in Howard Shore's work, I casually, in conversation with a friend, used the word leitmotif, and she stopped mid conversation, was like, "How do you know that word? Where did you learn that word from?" So you're teaching me little bits at the
I
very least. Now I know what a leitmotif is.
that's great.
Um, but yeah, there's absolutely, like we were talking before we were recording here. There's stuff in here for everybody. You've got the music nerd stuff. There's also awesome artwork in here as well, by the way.
Yeah,
But then
John
but then
Powell and
there's
Alan Ling were
stuff,
both very involved. They were
yeah.
hugely helpful.
But then there's great things about, filmmaking in here, and
Yeah.
for the Tolkien nerds, there's translations for a lot of, like, the Elvish that's going on in the background that you might not even think about. You just kind of hear, oh, it's angelic singing, and then you go in here and you find out, oh, there's all these book references that are in that music, and it's
That's right.
yeah, it's a great mix that appeals to a lot of people.
I mean, we tried to write it in layers. It's which is easy. I always feel like I'm taking too much credit for that because we really built it off the spine of Tolkien's story.
Hmm.
So it's the most compelling story in the world anyway. So we just sort of decorated it differently.
Yeah.
So we have things in there for the cinephiles. We have things in there for the music people. We have things in there for the Tolkien crowd. Um, and you sort of hopefully everybody gets a little something out of it. And if, like you say, if you learn something in the process, I hope it doesn't go down like a lecture. It should be. I would always kind of pitch this to people as it's narrative analysis. You
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
necessarily care about analysis, but you care about this story.
Right.
You have to pay attention because now it's all being told in musical terms.
Yeah.
Um, and we wanted to do it. I mean, it's it is like, I mean, if you go to the annotated scores, it's my retelling of Lord of the Rings
Hmm.
in the musical description, but it still walks you through every beat of the story,
Yeah.
which is daunting. But I mean, it felt like if I'm not going to be a writer on Tolkien's level, but I can steal a story.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, do you have, whether it's a, a translation that they used, or, a particularly clever anecdote from the process? Like, what's some of your favorite elements in this book that people find?
Well, I think the leitmotifs I always thought were done so
Yeah.
cleverly. We used to do a game when I would sort of do the convention circuit around the
Mhm.
the time of these films released, where you could make within, I think I chose 9 because it's a good Tolkien number. Within
Yeah.
9 steps, you could connect any theme back to itself. So
Mm.
I'd start with the history of the ring, and then I would talk about there's also the seduction of the ring, and that's sung by a boys' chorus, and that's related. The sound of the boys singing is also related to the Shire, and this instrument, uh, you use a symbolum in the music for Gollum, which is similar to the instrumentation from the Shire, and you would keep going around until you could return back to the original theme. But I'd let anyone in the crowd yell out a theme, and that was my idea of like showbiz,
Nice trick.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, you got to do some of these conventions, right? um, but like I find that just so ingenious the way that leitmotifs, and there's so many. We call them all themes in the score. Like I made a little index of themes, And it's maybe not musically the most accurate way to describe some of these things because some of them are just motivic things. They're a little short
Mhm.
bum 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 bum. It goes beneath a lot of the ring wraith music, for example.
Yeah, yeah.
So is that its own theme? I don't know. You can pick nits all day and decide what exactly constitutes a theme. Perhaps not. It's not a tune per se. It is a leitmotif. Um, but the way that all of these things, there's nothing in there that's in there just for effect. They are all
Mm,
related to culture. Most of the Lord of the Rings scoring is related to culture, which is different from the Hobbit, which is mostly largely about character more than culture.
mhm.
Um, and they're just so there's so much under the hood with all of it. If you
Yeah.
take the history of the ring theme, da, 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 if you play those notes simultaneously as a chord, that's the chord you always hear with the ring wraiths.
Mm,
So it just takes that stretched out theme and
yeah,
stops this way and plays them all at once. Things
yeah.
like that. I mean, it's a way to get the incredible subtext of Tolkien back into the movies without
Mm.
hitting pause and having someone come out with a pointer and a map. It was just it's so rewarding, I think. I did a lot of time in music school. When you study music, you're breaking down things to their elements, and you it's important and it's useful and it's beautiful, but you do risk losing the expressive appreciation for these things.
Mhm.
It's like it takes all the magic out.
Yeah.
So I wanted to see if there was a way to do analysis that made you like it better.
Right.
I don't know if I accomplished that, but it was certainly the
I
goal.
mean, as one who's, kinda dove into the book, I certainly have gained more appreciation, and
Oh, that's
that
beautiful.
I don't know that there's anything you could do that anyone could do to make anyone like, lessen their love of this music. I was just kinda thinking about this earlier. I don't know of another musical score from a film that has had the kind of impact that this has. I mean, you look at things like, people clamor for things like the complete recordings,
Yeah,
and we have this entire book that's just about the music of this film. And there's been obviously memorable soundtracks, memorable themes and everything, but I feel like this is just kind of on a whole other level than anything we've seen before.
I have to give credit to Howard for a lot of that too, because he was so careful. We knew these things were immensely popular. Like it
Yeah.
was it was a wild ride there for a long time, but he was always so careful not to just put things into the marketplace to sort of
Mm.
you know cash grab type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
He wanted to make sure that it was very specific, very controlled, and very necessary. Like the things that
Mhm.
that were released related to the score were good things that we needed
Yeah.
we needed to have, but not more.
Yeah.
And I thought that was such a beautiful approach to that. And again, like being a young person getting into the arts, it was so what an important lesson to learn. Like
Yeah.
don't be money hungry. And it's a good Tolkien lesson, right? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
say about greed, I believe.
Yeah.
Um, so I always deeply appreciated that it wasn't just like, well, you know, let's do the book with different colored covers and we'll have one where this
Right.
chapter comes in, this one. No, it's just like, let's just do a beautiful book. And we're going
Yeah.
to make it like this. And we're going to release it. We're going to do these box sets. We're going to do them right the first time. We're going to make them beautiful. And we're going to release them.
Yeah.
It does make some of these things harder to find down the line, I
Oh,
suppose,
yeah.
in the
Yeah.
market.
Yeah.
But
If anybody has ever searched like I have for the vinyl of the
I
complete recordings,
just
you'll know you might find them.
I'm not
They're
gonna talk about how many
expensive.
copies of that I have on a shelf downstairs, but
Oh
that's
my
okay.
word.
Uh, it's my promo copies. Yeah. Also, are they still crazy? This is me just being stupid, but are they still
No,
crazy on the
yeah.
secondary market? Are they still like,
Yeah, it's like $1,000 each.
oh
Yeah.
man, well, I
It's
need a new pair of shoes,
yeah, there you go.
Uh, I, you know, I don't pay my. I know, like, I have friends who are younger than I and very big into the vinyl market, but I gotta admit, I kind of look at them and go, I guess I don't know. Yeah, like this is what we got rid of when I was a kid.
Right,
I
yeah.
know when I was like,
But everything comes back eventually.
I know.
It's
Well,
yeah.
like cassettes were coming back for a while. Like, do you guys
Yeah.
just want like bad sound quality and you can't get around the album? This is what we're trying to get back.
Right, yeah, no,
Uh,
the cassette thing boggles my mind. My
yeah,
son one of my sons the other day said, "Can I get a cassette player?"
no kidding.
And I looked at him and I said, "Why?" And
Did
he
you
goes,
like a
"But
Walkman thing or they were like
yeah,
a
like a
boombox?
Walkman."
Okay, okay.
And I was like, "Why?" I was like, going to I was getting ready for lecture mode on why the sound quality would be terrible. And then he's like, "Oh, I wanna go as Star-Lord for Halloween
Oh,
Spirit." I'm
yeah, okay,
like,
nice.
"Oh,
Yeah, okay.
okay.
Uh,
That
uh,
I could get behind. Okay,
I
now
think
we're
you should
talking."
just put his AirPods in the dishwasher. It'll sound
Right.
like a
In the
cassette right
dishwasher.
away. Yeah. I
Now
don't know. All that stuff comes back though. You're right. Everyone's gonna
yeah,
be trying to get a mini disc player again in a couple of years.
yeah, there you
Which is,
go.
by the way, that's how I
8-track.
recorded all my early interviews. Like all my stuff when I'd go visit Howard those early trips and sit and we'd watch the film and kind of make our own commentary tracks. All
Yeah.
this stuff's on mini disc because I thought that was gonna be like, everyone's gonna be going mini disc, like cassette's gone away, DAT's going away. It's all be mini disc. It's like halfway through Return of the King, they're like, no one's doing mini
No
disc
one's doing that, yeah.
anything ever again. So I got stacks and stacks of mini discs, and I don't know what I'm gonna do with.
So now what I heard you say was that you have recordings of you and Howard doing a commentary
Yeah, all
on
3
all
of the
this.
Rings films, yeah.
Yeah, I think that deserves a release right there. I'm just saying. You can put it on, cassette tape if you want. I don't
That's
know.
yeah, I'll
Yeah,
send it
like
to all.
the
It's very rambling, like, we would just kind of watch them. The movies were new, so a lot of times it was just going like, "Gollum looks really cool in this."
Yeah.
Like, we would kinda get distracted by how good the
Oh,
movies
that's
were,
great, yeah.
and it was, like, old window unit air conditioners in his office and stuff, so I don't know. It would have to be, like, a deep cut for collectors.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned, how you guys were, like, the last ones out, flipping the light switch off, and then the dwarves come marching in to open things back up for business. So what was your experience like on the Hobbit films then?
Well, we were in Howard and I were in Switzerland together in Lucerne, and they were doing a cycle of all 3 of the Ring scores. We do the live to projection, we do the film, and the orchestra plays the score along with it live.
Hmm.
And it was like a 10-day festival. It was like 4 fellowships, 3 Two Towers, 3 Return of the Kings, and then like a bunch of stuff. So it was like a really cool thing. And he and I were over there together. And I think I had just flown in. He got there a day before I did. I just flew in, and we had a meeting with the conductor where we were going to work out like another concert where we could talk about the themes, kind of like
Yeah.
doing this sort of thing. And we did that, and I was like, "All right, I'm so jet lagged, Howard. I've been up for like 50 hours, and I'll meet you at tonight's fellowship performance. So I'm going to go get some sleep." And I went back to the hotel room, and I think it was like a scene out of a badly edited film. My head just touched the pillow, just made contact, and the phone rings, and it's Howard saying like, "Hey, I just talked to Pete. We're getting started on the Hobbit." Like, oh, and once again I couldn't sleep. Like my insomnia is
Yeah.
that's the leitmotif of this conversation. um, but I said, "Oh, what did you guys talk about?" He's like, "Well, he was actually on the set. They were shooting the Gollum stuff for the first. This was still his 2 films."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Yeah, you gotta talk." And so, like, can you come downstairs? Let's just go over to the concert hall now, and we'll kind of hang out before the concert and talk about this. And so I don't know how long I made it like 3 days with no sleep.
Oh my gosh.
It was not a healthy thing. And I was like there to lecture before these scores. So I don't know.
Wow.
I think at one of them I decided I could speak German. I was just going to try it and see what happened. I didn't know anything, and I handed it off to some. There was a gentleman there that was doing the woodwind solos with all the unusual instruments, the gaita and the penny whistles and stuff. And I like kind of introduced him and handed it off to him in German, and he spoke for like 10 minutes in German. I don't know. My German is rough, and he turned back to me. He's like, "Yeah, I don't know. I thought I could speak German." But anyways, we sat and talked about how have other composers, because he knew that I knew, sort of the body of film music that had been written
Yeah.
for history. And he knew what he knew, but when you're a composer, most of the time you're listening to your own music. You don't have a lot of time or the luxury to sit and go, what did this composer do? What did this game? You're not
Yeah.
listening to other people. And I don't think you want it to sort of block out your own creative thoughts anyway.
Yeah.
So he was picking my brain about what have other composers done when they go back and do a prequel, essentially,
Yeah.
an earlier, chronologically earlier score. And so I just tried to talk about some of what had been done in the past and how other composers approached it. I said, but do you bring back any of the themes? And I
Mm.
said, well, some themes, yeah, sometimes they deconstruct them and work them backwards to make something else. Sometimes they just start from scratch. And it was just sort of starting. I don't even think there was ever an official like, should we be together on this? Like at that point, it
Mm.
was just kind of, well, this is our Tolkien family. We're just
It's
gonna
what
keep
you
going.
do. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, we had already been doing. We did a tiny thing for Hugo in between. Um, so we were kind of seeing each other every day anyway. Yeah, I just keep going. So we did that, but at this point, you know, uh, everybody in New Zealand knew me. The studio knew me. Like I was kind of a safe bet. So rather than going through that extended vetting process from Lord of the Rings, it was just here's your NDA. You're on the project.
Right.
Um, which was it was fun and it made it a little easier and also a little crazier because now,
Mm.
like when we did the first things that I ever had published on Lord of the Rings were the liner notes for the complete recordings.
Mhm.
We didn't start doing those until Return of the King had, finished his theatrical run.
Yeah.
So like everything was in place. We knew what everything was. I every bit of music that was written, I had access to. I knew what it was. Um, it's harder to analyze a score as it's being written
Mm.
because there are elements in like Return of the King. Some of these. Well, here I can give you a better example.
Yeah.
The Gondor theme.
Mhm.
The Gondor theme is the principal theme of Return of the King,
Mhm.
but the first place you hear it is in Fellowship. You hear it at the
Right.
Council of Elrond when Boromir speaks.
Yeah.
And I used to pester him and go, like, "Is that the Gondor theme? Is that the other thing?" He would never tell me because, like, first of all, everyone was sort of getting used to it anyway.
Yeah.
But he's just such a cagey guy. And I don't know, maybe it'd probably be good, wouldn't it? I don't know. And then it came back in Two Towers in the extended edition, and it was finally there in Return of the King. But if I had to write the liner notes for Fellowship in '01,
Mm.
number one, they wouldn't have let me say anything because
Right.
it was a sort of a breadcrumb. But like we didn't know. Like I couldn't quote Howard going, I don't know. Uh, so it was hard
Yeah.
doing Hobbit because I kind of had to ask those hard questions. Go, you got to tell me because
Yeah.
this is going
Yeah.
to be a thing. Like we got to figure this out. Um, so it was a cool process. I would go out there in the fall.
Mm.
I think I was always out there in early October for a handful of days or a couple of weeks or something. And it was weird because the score was being recorded at that time, so it wasn't even all recorded. So they would give me a work print of the film, and some of these work prints were not very complete because it wasn't always like the latest cut, as long as the timing was right.
Right.
So there could have like effects could have been farther along, but I was just seeing like 8-bit like Nintendo characters running around. Um, but they would have synced up whatever music was recorded and properly edited.
Mhm.
And if that wasn't, then I would get the mock-ups, the synth mock-ups, which are just sort of like his placeholder temporary things to
Yeah.
show how this fits into the edit, but it wasn't live instruments or anything. And I think I mostly had the written scores to go along with everything.
Mm.
But like you have like this press timeline, and these are the timelines you can't mess with because these are studio deadlines.
Right.
So this CD is coming out on November 17th to December 1st. I don't remember the release date, but
Yeah.
like it had to be in. And we would take this thing down to like was there was one time I had I had come back home and I'd finished my writing. I turned everything into the studio and I'm like, cool, 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 I got it. And I went out with like some friends to celebrate and got some dinner and stuff. And in the middle of it, I got a text message from Warner Brothers with just a note from Peter Jackson saying, like, I don't want you to talk about this character yet. Can you write something instead of this passage, write something like this. And he did like his own example, only make it better. I had to leave my own celebration and go home and like just keep
Finish it off again. Yeah.
um and so things like that were tricky, but it was a lot easier to sort of have access to everything right away, and I could ask the
Mm.
questions of going, okay, whose theme is that? Because I gotta have names for these things.
Yeah.
And we were friendlier at that point. I suppose I was a little more bold at that point. That's one of those things, and it was nice to be involved because I was always like sort of in the room when the final stuff was happening with the
Mm.
with the albums too, so they could ask like, "Can you check this? We need a title for this track. What can
Mm.
we do?" Or look, which translation are we using here? Like we're trying to figure out what this choral text, which part of what we're using, or things
Yeah.
like that. It's very
Yeah.
basic stuff. And that was a lot of fun. I like that a lot. We did those for those sort of 3 falls in a row, and I think we did a thing at Lincoln Center after that, which is another uh, cycle for the ring scores, where we talked about Howard and I lectured a little bit about Hobbit, but kind
Mm.
of left it at that. But those liner notes, they came out pretty nicely. I hit a bunch of classical music nerd jokes in the things and stuff, so I was feeling a little bit looser at that point, and they're fun to do. They're fun to do.
Yeah. I gotta say one of my favorite themes from the Hobbit movies is actually the Lake Town theme.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's great.
Yeah, I love like as soon as that one pops up, so that's in the second movie. But yeah, as soon as that one popped up, I remember sitting in the theater and being like, "Oh, like
Yeah.
it's so I can't put my finger on it, but like it's so unique,
It's another one of those ones though, where he thought it out so carefully because it's related to the other mankind themes from
yeah.
Lord of the Rings. The first da da dun 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 dun. Like
Mm,
it's that same sort of intervallic structure. It's very related to other things he did for mankind. So
yeah.
your ears are picking up. I mean, even if you're not going, oh, it's a fifth. I know what a fifth sounds like, what that usually means, but that kind of brass orchestration and that type of
Mm,
intervallic leaping. Most of the themes in Lord of the Rings move by steps, like the notes right next to each other. If you imagine a
mhm.
piano keyboard, it's usually only themes for mankind, usually that leap around in that sort of
Oh.
contemporary way. The elf stuff tends to be more triadic. It like outlines chord tones and things like that. So yeah, your ears immediately took you to.
Ah.
It feels like something. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
kinda cool.
Now do you have I know it was really hard to pick any favorites. Do you have a favorite from The Hobbit?
You know, I'm a big fan of the Smog material, to be honest. I like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that was one of the big questions I had. You never want to say these things. The same as I said, composers rarely listen to other composers because you don't want to block out your own creative thoughts.
Yeah.
So I was always very cautious. I wouldn't say like, "Have you considered trying this? What are you going to do for this?" I didn't want to pester him about things, but I was very curious how he would treat Smow chronologically. There's like a very specific way he would write for the different eras of Middle Earth. Things that were more ancient were more chromatic. Things that were more modern
Ah,
were more sort of modal or pentatonic. And I kept thinking, well, where does Smaug fit into that?
yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and he made it work perfectly. He's got exactly the proper amount of chromaticism, not staying within a single key signature, to sort of put Smaug in the correct era. He uses a different intervallic structure than you hear in the other ancient themes.
Mhm.
So it's cool, and the instrumentation is quite different without that gamelan influence and things like that. So yeah, he found a way to make it work, and I like that a lot. I think it's a great classic theme. It's a multi-layered theme. There's
Mhm.
several. There's like I forget what we call them. I'm looking at my name of all the Smaug, actually all of the Hobbit themes here. So we had, I know. We had for Smog. Where is he? Where is he? Oh no, maybe he didn't. Maybe we cut him out of the book. This is the old-fashioned way. This make for good YouTube. Yeah,
No, this is
that's
great.
on his own
We're
document. Okay, we had the furnace chords with those sort of breathing in and out chords, which would just be like
mm,
F major, F minor, F major, F minor, like one note in the middle of the chord is moving. Smaug the Magnificent, Smaug the Terrible, Smaug Defeated, and then a theme for Dragon Sickness. So there's like
ah,
this big collection of thematic material. Dragon Sickness doesn't even really show up too much until the third score. So there's still
Right.
small
Yeah.
influence of the score happening after his demise.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Yeah, I it's like you said, it's kinda like the Chris Farley thing, like, you remember that one theme that was
Yeah.
awesome? Like, I feel like that's what I'm doing right now.
I know, that's good. I think Smog, that's always where I would, like, bail on the cartoon because it got too scary when I was a kid. But I was always fascinated, like, "What's that dragon gonna do? What's he gonna
Right.
be?" Didn't he have, like, a beard in the cartoon? He had, like, a or a mane?
He had, like, hair
He
coming
like
out
mutton
the
chop.
side. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is like mutton chops. Oh
Yeah,
my
so I
god.
was always fascinated by that. It was, like, a really creepy monster. So I think I was
I tried
uh,
showing that cartoon, by the way, to my kids, and, like,
in a play?
they have seen the movies and love the movies, and, like, my 8-year-old, his favorite character across all 6 films is Smaug. He loves Smaug.
Okay,
You
okay.
know, he's into dinosaurs, dragons, it's a giant, huge dragon. Um, so, yeah, it's an easy win, but, yeah, I tried showing them, like, the animated, uh, Lord of the Rings and Hobbit, and they were just like, "What Dad, what is this? Like, what?"
The animated Lord of the Rings is pretty trippy.
It
That one
is,
I
yeah,
gotta say.
yeah.
That
But,
one
like,
I'm still afraid of.
I still I have and I didn't see it, very early, but I think the animated, Hobbit has oh,
No,
oh, sorry.
that's okay. Technical difficulty.
I think I, unplugged my camera here. Oh, what the heck? Come on now. That's weird. I have it actually plugged in, so it's saying charge or change battery, and it's not a battery, it's
Oh, maybe you lost your power too.
yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll try that again.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, something animated movies.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Long story short, put pants on Aragorn.
yeah, so that's right, he does have, like, a skirt.
Yeah, he's got a skirt, and
Um,
I guarantee you there's nothing under that thing. It's horrible.
yeah,
I don't want that.
um, but yeah, so yeah, they were not sold on the animated versions, but
I
yeah,
liked the Hobbit one when I was a kid. I don't know. I mean, it was creepy. The Gollum voice was great.
yeah.
The kind
It's
of
got, like, a
weird
certain
facial
whimsy
expression.
to it,
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
appreciate it even now, yeah.
It was made by the guys that did like the Rudolph
Like
Christmas.
Rudolph, yeah, Rudolph and
Yeah.
Frosty and all that stuff,
Same,
yeah.
I think the same songwriter, wasn't it? Like Johnny Marks or somebody
Oh,
who
was
did
it? I
the
don't
I think
know.
so.
That's a
I don't know, I could be wrong.
that'd be a good little bit of trivia.
The next book.
Yeah. Yeah, and speaking of which,
Uh,
I need to pull up a screen here because I have
oh, no, you saved him.
yes, I know, I of course I saved them. I'm not gonna risk you deleting the tweets. So,
Oh, so there's my Switzerland story. Yeah.
yeah, so this is yeah, you mentioned Switzerland. So it's a series of 4 images that you recently shared on the platform formerly known as Twitter. I still call it Twitter.
And you too.
Uh, but these are these are bits that people were quick to notice. These are not Lord of the Rings bits. These are Hobbit bits. So does this mean that there's hope that, folks like myself who've long desired a shelf companion for my Middle Earth for my Lord of the Rings music book. Is there hope for a Hobbit version?
There's always hope. There's always hope. I mean, I don't have any specific announcements to make. The Hobbit book we did do that was actually probably the most intense part of the entire Hobbit experience
Mm,
is that I came back and so we kind of got into the habit as these things got bigger that they dragged me into or gave me the chance to do some of the promotional stuff. So I
mhm.
did some of the uh, documentaries and I did some of the appearances, and I think we did a thing at Comic Con
Mm,
like the year that the Five Armies came out.
yeah.
And then I came back for that, and I was in the process of moving. I had just gotten a new house, and it was kind of like moving's never fun, so it was a stressful time. But I was told, okay, we'll finish your move, but we need this Hobbit book. This was what year did Five Armies come out? 14?
I that's what I was thinking was
Yeah,
14,
I think
yeah.
it's 12, 13, 14 were the Hobbit films. I think.
Yeah.
We need this book by April of 15.
Mm.
Like, oh gosh, okay. Well, the last one took me 10 years.
10 years, that's what I
Yeah.
was just thinking, like,
Um,
that's
And then we
significantly
had
shorter.
yeah, we had those Lincoln Center performances that spring, and I was speaking at those I did a bunch of speaking. I think maybe I was just doing autograph sessions or something, but it was like every day, and then I'd lock myself in my hotel room and just write. And I barely made I think I like on like April 30th, I
Mm,
like turned everything in. And I was thrilled we'd made it. So the Hobbit book does exist. It's about I'm looking at it over here. It's not on camera. The Lord of the Rings book I think was 400 pages. This one it says it's 246. This is just my
okay.
temporary layout. We'd have to do it properly, but I did it in the manner as you can see from those images. It looks like the Lord of the Rings book. We just
Yeah.
some new categories and things. The music examples you see there, literally some of them are just like screen captures of things I cut out of the scores and things like
Yeah. Yeah.
that. So yeah, it does exist. It's all written. It's in the exact same manner with introduction, introduce you to all the themes, take you through the story type of thing, and then a little wrap up of, that was essentially Howard's, last efforts in Middle Earth, and he was kind of putting that franchise away.
Hmm.
But yeah, then it just kind of got hung up, and there have been a lot of goings on with the rights
Yeah.
trading from different holders and things like that. So it's just sort of been on a shelf recently, and
Mm,
I would love to get it off the shelf. These are expensive things to make, and
yeah.
they happily created a very beautiful volume for us for this first book, and that took so much work. We had to lay that
Yeah.
thing twice to get it right, and we worked with a brilliant layout artist, Gary Day Ellison, and John Howe and Al Nee were immensely involved. They just we couldn't figure out what image we wanted for the cover, so we just got a note one day from Alan Lee. Here, I've drawn you a new cover. Take this on. It's good. Uh, so these things are expensive, and I'm
Yeah.
hoping that there's enough interest out there that it's not just something that appeals to just like I said, the Lord of the Rings one, we have film fans and Tolkien fans and music
Yeah.
fans,
Yeah.
so I'm hoping that we have that sort of multi-layered fan base still in existence for this type of thing.
Yeah.
We'll see. So I mean, I'm not announcing any massive forward progress, but it would be nice. It would be nice.
Yeah. It would be. Yeah. And so I will keep yeah, tooting the horn, and
Yeah, it doesn't hurt.
we're
It doesn't hurt.
we're calling for 8. So I don't know, like, you guys can folks watching this, let's see here. Who do we need to I'm looking at the publishing info. It's like, okay, who do we need to call here? Who should we flood their email inbox?
Oh god. Well, yeah, I don't want to
We
bother.
don't we don't want we don't want to land that on Doug. So we'll leave that for another stream where we can talk about who we flood their inbox.
the,
Um,
the the small handful of my inner circle that read this one, they've said that they found it more revealing than Lord of the Rings, just
mm,
because there's I think Howard's thematic writing at that point had become even more um, like the themes are more woven into the texture of the score often in the
mm,
Hobbit. Like the main themes, like the Lake Town and things like that, where we can
yeah,
hum them, are certainly very prominent as ever. But a lot of the other stuff is more not subliminal necessarily, but it's a
yeah.
little more woven.
Mm.
And so I think the people that have read it have said like, "Oh wow, I had no
Didn't
idea."
notice. Yeah,
Actually,
yeah,
and once you see them, it's like I was like, I do these things. I I, I don't, I guess, question the whole. There's a concept in writing about the arts of the death of the author, saying like, well, it doesn't really matter what the creator thought. If an
mm,
analyst finds this in there, then it's valid. And I go back and forth on how I feel about that. I suppose it doesn't matter. All I can say is for my own purposes, I would never want to make one of these without the contribution and the oversight of the original creator.
yeah.
Lord of the Rings, certainly, like I would say, hey, there's this connection here, and Howard would sometimes go, oh yeah, I did do that. He was, you do these things. A film score is written in an insane timeline,
Yeah.
so you don't always have that sort of luxury of hindsight. So I would point these things out to him, and he would validate them and say yes. And once in a while, I go like, no, that wasn't what I was thinking. I
Mm,
don't want to phrase it that way. I don't think that's accurate. Um, so same thing with Hobbit. Like I made sure that he was always involved, and that the ideas that I was presenting were things that he agreed with or sort of blessed with. Yeah, that's valid. That's right. Um, and again, that's like an ongoing, and it won't. There'll never be a final answer of whether or not it matters if the original author
Oh, yeah,
of
yeah.
the creative thing is involved.
That's a, yeah, that's a debate that will last forever. I
Yeah,
have a
and
feeling of, yeah.
for my own purposes, I don't think I'd ever wanna be like, "Well, here's what Beethoven really meant." Like,
Right, yeah.
he's gotta chime in. I don't think I have the right to say that.
Well, we'll certainly be crossing our fingers for that music of The Hobbit because, yeah,
Thanks.
I think I would, yeah, I would like to see that come out. You know, like you said, get it off the shelf, get it onto our shelves. That's where we want it to be. Um,
Yeah.
Now, is there? I mean, like obviously the music and the scores are this monumental achievement. I don't think that's an exaggeration to say. Is there, you know, in your time working with Howard, is there a particular memory you have or anything that you were just like, wow, I am so impressed by this guy and his work?
Um, I mean, it's sort of a loaded question because I was a
Yeah.
fan before I met him.
Mm, yeah.
Um, I always he was in film music. I kind of thought of him as our secret weapon.
Mm,
Before Lord of the Rings, he did, you know, he had a strange resume of really dark body horror things with Cronenberg, and then
yeah.
like Big and Mrs. Doubtfire. Like,
Yeah.
I never forget, like, how did they? Who thought like we need this Cronenberg guy to
See,
do
that's
Big?
wild. I showed my kids Mrs. Doubtfire
Okay.
recently for the very first time, and
Oh, cool.
then, like, the credits pull up and it says Howard Shore. I was like, "What?"
Yeah, yeah,
It's
and like he was
wild. Yeah. I
his
was like,
career has been so interesting. He was the original
yeah.
band leader on Saturday Night
Saturday
Live.
Night Live, yep.
So his path crossed with all these sort of like pop and rock people from that
Yeah,
era, and he was trying to like bring in sort of unusual, kind of more fringe jazz people and blues guys and things like
yeah,
that. Like he's very open minded and very interested in all sorts of stuff.
yeah.
Um,
He
but
did,
like
like, The Fly was
he did
another
The
one.
Fly. That was
Yeah.
his first orchestral film score, like full
Mhm.
orchestra with the London Philharmonic, who ended up doing Lord of the Rings. Um, He was like, I think he had a hard time on The Fly. I think, Mel Brooks is the producer of The Fly, if you can believe that.
Oh,
Yeah, because
really?
it was kinda like Cronenberg's first foray into sort of like big I mean, I don't know, you call Jeff Goldblum throwing up on people a big commercial film, but I mean, it was kind of in that category, big horror.
Yeah.
And I don't think he understood the score at first too. Like, "Ah, it's too much. I don't want this. Just get rid of the score." But Cronenberg stuck with them because he was right. It was a brilliant score. Um, but he wasn't known by the general public. The public, even if you're not a film person or a music person, you're John Williams is, and
Mhm.
who's big right now. Any of these people, but only we nerds knew about him. He was our
Yeah.
secret guy. So to watch him kind of be cut loose to do Lord of the Rings
Mhm.
and just have this massive palette that just got more and more inclusive and incredible. And uh, I think that there's a certain pride in that, which is very odd because like Howard's my parents' age, and he was always very warm and fatherly toward me.
Mm.
But I kind of felt like it was almost like the shoe was on the other foot for that. We're like, "Oh, there's my boy going out in the world and being a huge success." Just because we felt like this sort of, uh, we nerds loved his work so much, and to
Mm.
see the
Yeah.
rest of the world, he was doing things like The Fly and The Brood and Videodrome, and then you watch little kids come up and be embarrassed to ask him for his autograph and treat him like he's Santa
Yeah.
Claus at a Lord of the Rings concert, and it was the funniest thing because it was just like he was like the secret guy.
Yeah. Well, it's
I
kinda
don't know,
like,
this is what catches it,
I
but it was
I
like
kinda make this comparison with fairly recent-ish is, Andy Serkis because he's
mm.
done all these digital creatures, and then so a lot of
Yeah.
my friends, when they saw Andor, is, like,
Oh,
one of
okay.
the first times that they saw him, like, in the flesh,
Right.
and, he has such an incredible, like, I won't spoil it, I guess, but you guys should definitely watch Andy Serkis in Andor because it's really good. But like his final episode in there is just he's so good and so intense. And I had like people texting me like, oh my gosh, this Andy Serkis guy. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
guys, like
Yeah.
way to catch up. He's been all these digital characters for so long, and like, yeah,
That's
no surprise, he's an amazing actor. So yeah, it's kind of similar vibe to what you're describing here.
Yeah, I mean, as fans of things, I think we feel a sense of ownership that maybe we shouldn't always, and probably sometimes it's applied unhealthily as well. But things like that, where it's like you just sort of beam to see, like I knew they could do this. I knew they were going to be great and do something huge, and
Yeah,
then it happens, and you just feel so happy that something that you so treasured is now treasured by the rest of the world. And I
yeah.
think it's like a very beautiful thing.
Now, obviously we have a new Lord of the Rings film coming later this year,
You do.
the animated War of the Rohirrim, and I would imagine you worked with Stephen Gallagher when you were working with Howard on the Hobbit films. He was the
We met digitally a little
music
bit.
editor. Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, he did uh the uh the
I think he was editing, wasn't he?
he's editing, but he also did one of the dwarves songs, like where they're singing about
Oh,
chip the plates and all that.
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's his work as well. Yeah, he's a lovely guy. Very, very sweet guy. I mean,
yeah,
again, we've kind of like talk on Facebook and stuff, so I don't
yeah.
know. I can't claim that he's like, my boon companion, but he's
Right.
been nothing but extremely kind. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like, yeah, likewise. I've had a few limited interactions and everything. Seems like a really nice guy, and yeah, I'm gonna hopefully have him on the channel here at some point to
Oh,
talk
good,
about
good.
the work that he's done. But obviously they're using some of Howard Shore's themes and stuff.
Mhm.
And that's obviously we can expect to hear a lot of that Rohan theme. Um, what you shared recently, I believe, how and I thought this was, is in the wake of the passing of Bernard Hill. Um, and it was just so beautiful, and like it just added another layer of love that I have for the Rohirrim and for that character. The fact that Theoden doesn't have a theme himself, and like the Rohan theme is Theoden's theme, and I just, oh my god, I got goosebumps when I heard you talking about that.
As you know, as I was kind of hinting at earlier, a lot of the scoring in Lord of the Rings is cultural.
Yeah,
Uh, and so I think he embodied that culture, the culture of the
yeah,
Rohirrim. Uh, and I think because of that, the theme that's applied to that culture applies to him equally as well.
yeah.
And I should point out, there are a few themes in the collection of the Rohan themes that are personal themes. It's sort
Mhm,
of rare for Lord of the Rings, but Eowyn has a number of her own themes.
mhm.
Um, which is not to say that she is not the embodiment of Rohan as well.
Right,
She
right.
is treated as like, you know, they're not as accepting of her and of her skills because she's a woman. And that's like an
Mhm.
important arc to see, that like, please do not underestimate this character. She's as
Yeah,
powerful as anyone. But because of that, she's a little bit more individualistic, I think. But Theoden is every bit what this culture is about, and
mhm.
and good and bad. It's the fact that it's sort of fallen from glory, and that it has
Yeah,
a certain reluctance to it, and almost a sadness to it in a way.
yeah,
It eventually becomes very heroic. By Return of the King, that theme is as heraldic as anything,
yeah,
as Gondor, really. But there is a sort of you take something that sounds. I think we eventually named it the Rohan fanfare, but it's played by
yeah.
the fiddle. You don't really have a fiddle playing a fanfare traditionally.
Mm,
So it feels uh, not weakened, but more tactile, more personal, in a sort of way that every person has their sort of built-in frailties.
yeah,
And so I think he was such an embodiment of that with his uh, performance, that grand Shakespearean performance that he gives, of going from this crumpled, withered king to a sort of nervous and reluctant and mourning character, mourning
yeah,
for his son, and then eventually someone that is really the embodiment of self-sacrifice. He's
yeah,
no he know you know I always love that in his performance. At the moment of his death, he looks like, oh, oh no, but not like in a I have to get out of this oh no, just like, well, here it is. Oh no.
Yeah, yeah,
Because he knows he's going to die. He does the
right,
to death, to death.
yeah,
Um, but he's, he's human. None of us is ready when the moment comes, I suppose.
right, yeah. But
But
yeah,
he's
you're totally right. It's just a yeah, just a well,
yeah,
here we
here we
go.
go.
Yeah, yeah, here we
Right,
go.
yeah. It's a
This
beautiful I mean,
this
his
is gonna hurt. Yeah.
yeah, right, yeah. It has to be easier. It's one of the best performances in that original. I mean, even though he's only in 2 of the films, but it's one of the best
Yeah.
performances in the trilogy, I think.
Well, that's why, when folks ask me like, "Oh, which is your favorite Lord of the Rings movie?" Part of the reason that because I feel like a lot of people the standard answer is Fellowship.
Mhm,
Everyone
mhm.
that's the most popular pick, I think. But I can't make that plunge without a lot of consideration because then you lose you know, the Rohirrim, not just like the Rohirrim characters, but the Rohirrim music is some of my
Right.
favorite too. So it's like, man, am I gonna rank Fellowship above and then like not have, it's like Desert Island,
Yeah.
if you're a
Well, it's
D&D player
interesting,
on
like,
Desert
those
Island.
scores too, like, the first score is where he establishes the world,
Mhm.
he's sort of pulling the curtain back and showing you Middle-earth. The second score is where you feel that musical world expand,
Yeah.
and going into Rohan is such an important part of that, but just you're now meeting new cultures, and you're watching these themes bounce off of each other in a new way, and then Return of the King begins expanding and then brings everything back together at the end.
Yeah.
So they all have those very, uh, unique and special, characters to them. That gets into the same thing too, where it's like it's hard to judge any of those things. So Return of the King, I'm sitting in the orchestra for the "You Bow to No One" moment.
Mm.
So things like that are so personal that,
Oh yeah.
who could ever pick a favorite I mean, even if I had nothing to do with these things, I wouldn't be able to pick a favorite, so
Right.
it only makes it worse.
It's hard. Yeah, it's like I feel like anything Tolkien or anything Lord of the Rings Middle Earth films and stuff, it gets really hard to pick favorites.
I think the films and the scores alike are there's something very mirror-like to all of them. They all
Mm,
sort of show us sides of ourselves that we notice at different times.
mm.
So it's kind of like saying, "Well, what's your favorite element of your personality?" I or your least favorite, I
Like
suppose, right?
yeah,
Yeah. Like, it's hard to
like
say.
it's all part of the whole. It's all
Yeah,
part of
they all
it's
have a very special connection to us,
gotta
and it's
take it.
all
Yeah.
yeah, it's all makes us what we are, so that's just how it works.
Well, I have a few more. I like to ask some people, at the end of the interview, some more rapid fire type questions.
Okay.
So
Is the
these are
lightning round?
yeah, this is kind of like a lightning round. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So these are easy and you can take as I say lightning round, it's very anything with nerds, it's like it's a very slow and deliberate lightning strike. Um
Yeah.
so favorite Middle Earth location.
Hmm.
Like if you were going to visit somewhere in Middle Earth, where would it be?
If I'm going to visit okay.
Yeah, if you're gonna go
I have a
visit,
very
I'll
strong
phrase it
I
like
live
that.
kind of in a forest over here, so I have a connection to the Shire from that, but
Mm,
then I suppose if I have to go visit someplace, I think I'd go to Rivendell. Seems like a good they probably have a good
good.
spa there or something, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Now if you were gonna go live someplace in Middle Earth, like
Shire.
permanently,
That'd be fun.
Shire?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I already did that.
Yeah, right. Um, okay, and if you were in Middle Earth, what race of being would you be?
I'd be like that one reluctant elf off in the corner that doesn't really like I value art and I value aesthetics, but I kind of don't want to leave the house that much.
Yeah.
Was there one of those? There's got to be one of those.
You're like a
Uh,
Bilbo-ish,
yeah,
elf then.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm relatively tall and relatively thin, but I just kind of want to, sit in the pub. That's fine.
What about, character? Favorite Middle Earth character?
Hmm. Would that be one that you relate to the best, or you just enjoy watching
I
their
mean,
journey?
you can give an answer for each if you want. We there's no hard and fast rules, in case you hadn't noticed with this lightning round, there's
Okay, okay. Boy, I don't know. I think, I guess I like Gandalf quite a bit,
yeah.
he's sort of that prototypical Tolkien wizard anyways. Like you see
Mhm.
that and you just immediately go, well, I know what this is. He's got a pointy hat. It's a insanely warm and rewarding performance from Ian
Mm.
McKellen. Um, I forgot I should mention that too. They let me write dialogue for Ian McKellen at one point.
Really?
We had to do a radio piece for I don't even know what it was. One of the performances of the Lord of the Rings live music.
Mm.
And it was like I was working with a production company. It was like a middle of the night turnaround. Like we got to have something we got Ian McKellen. We got nothing for him to say. And so I had to write him a script like the night before.
Wow.
Yeah, I still have that someplace, and I think he changed a word or two, which I is certainly not gonna do that. But I got to write dialogue for Ian McKellen. I felt like, and he would like. I think I came up with a tagline that was never used. It was like the Lord of the Rings live and perform, or live in concert, or whatever. Come share in the power, or something like that.
Mm.
And he gave like the classic Ian McKellen, it was like 12 syllables to the word power. And I was thinking like, that's so cool. So, yeah, maybe that's. I guess I have to say Gandalf then, right? Like I got
Yeah, I mean, gosh, if you've written dialogue for
uh,
Gandalf, I feel like
as good as it gets.
that's a lock, yeah. Um, so and final lightning-ish round question here. Aside from Middle-earth, what are some of your favorite film scores?
Favorite film scores? Uh, well, I grew up in the era of the 70s and 80s, so
Mhm.
you would be a fool to deny the influence and the genius of John Williams. So
Yeah.
all the Spielberg things and
Oh,
the
yeah.
Star Wars trilogy and things like that. I mean, those things are. It's funny. A lot of the like I'm in Chicago, and the Chicago
Mm.
Symphony Orchestra is known for being one of the best orchestras in the world, one of the best brass sections in the world. But I'm at that age now where a lot of these players are around my age as well. It used to be all
Mm.
the old people now I'm one of the old people. But like the influence that had on people getting into music
Mhm.
and people's even like the playing style. Like people like to play like they heard on these old London Symphony recordings from the 70s and 80s. I think it was. I think the influence of those will be felt for decades, if not
Yeah.
centuries. And I think that'll be somebody else's book at some point of just like what has this done to orchestral playing. So I
Yeah.
think that's enormously important. Jerry Goldsmith was so great. Some of these earlier composers, I was talking before, like Miklos Rozsa, Max Steiner, um, Dmitry Tiomkin, these brilliant people that were sort of all these European emigres that came over just before World War II broke out to
Mm.
escape the political situation in Europe, had a huge influence. I mean, that is the sound of film music, even to a
Mm.
degree, even modern film music. I mean, we still think of, even though it's not really in vogue right now, but we still think of that big, lush orchestral voice as the sound of film music.
Yeah.
And it's not at the moment. Oppenheimer did not have that type of score.
Right. Yeah.
Um, will it come back? Maybe. I mean, everyone said it was dead when Star Wars came out. Everyone thought
Right.
it was going to be Simon and Garfunkel for the next 20 years, and then Star Wars. So you never know. But things like that, I think, were hugely important. When we did Hugo, I have like another unreleased book. We did a book called Impossible Silence, which was basically the history of film music in its first 25 years, which is the silent period. And it
Mm.
was shocking to me how many of these classical composers that we kind of think of as at the end of that period of music tried early film scores in the very, very early 1900s.
Mm.
There were wonderful composers. Saint-Saëns wrote for film. There's a great composer, Gottfried Huppertz, did like the original score for Metropolis, and he was a great
Oh.
composer. He did for Fritz Lang. He did the Nibelungen Saga, and of course, the Nibelungen Saga is what Wagner did for his Ring. So
Yeah.
there's like all these kind of connections between the leitmotifs in Huppert's Nibelungen scores and Wagner's Ring operas and Howard Shore's Ring film scores,
Yeah.
which is an amazing connection between all these. I'm doing a lecture, I think, in New York next January on the connections between Wagner and Shore. So some of these things are kind of bouncing
Oh,
around my mind
interesting.
right now. Yeah, it could be kind of cool. I don't know. I'm not sure what they want, so maybe it'll just be like you just go out there and hum the Ring theme.
Yeah.
I hope that. Yeah,
Well,
but
that
stuff
was
like that, like it's so
yeah.
good. there's been so much good music written for film, and it's finally shedding that stigma of being like a lesser
Yeah.
quality music, and largely because again, these people that were influenced when they were kids and now are playing in major orchestras, they want to play this stuff. They like
Yeah.
this music. If you came up on Star Wars, you know, that's what that's what you wanted to get into an orchestra for. That's what
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
excited about. Um, the gentleman who played Princess Leia's theme on the original recording is a French horn player named David Cripps, and he just passed away about 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Mm.
And all the Chicago brass players were just sort of making a big deal about his passing, as well they should. He was a
Yeah.
wonderful player, and telling the stories about how he did this on his first take, and it was after most of the orchestra had been dismissed. It was the end of the day, and Williams hadn't given him the music yet. It was just sort of, oh, I have something for you to play. And so things like this, I think, are slowly allowing those types of experiences to become our new classical experiences. We have
Mm.
all the stories that we tell through music school of Haydn and Mozart, and Mozart dictating his requiem on his deathbed and things like that. So now we're
Yeah.
getting the stories that have happened in our lifetime, and they're becoming part of that cycle of
Yeah.
the great narrative of music. Howard Shore has done so many amazing film scores that aren't in Middle Earth.
Yeah.
There's a score he did the film he did for Al Pacino is a sort of semi-documentary called Looking for Richard.
Mm.
Lord of the Rings fans would love that one. Lord of the Rings films would love a lot of the music in, believe it or not, Kevin Smith's Dogma that Howard Shore scored.
Really?
The end of that is a lot of similarities with like the Rivendell music and a lot of big operatic choral stuff. It kind of deals with like biblical things and angels and things like that.
Oh, I've seen the movie. It's been ages since I was probably, before Lord of the Rings that I
It
saw
was
that, I would
just before
imagine.
Lord of the Rings, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The Cell he did was a Jennifer Lopez, like, weird horror serial killer
Mm.
movie. Score is incredibly unique on that one. The Fly, of course, is a
Yeah.
gorgeous operatic tragedy thing. So many of the things,
Yeah.
But that's there's endless things to discover. The whole, I haven't even gotten to, like, the Newman family or Alfred Newman and Thomas Newman and David Newman. And all the contributions they've made to film music. Is this a good lightning answer?
Yes. I
That's a
told
good
you
place for you? Okay,
it's a
so
very slow and deliberate lightning
alright,
strike.
yeah,
I told you.
it's
It's all
timed
good.
lightning, so, yeah, there's great stuff, and that's not to say, like, that concert hall music is not also incredibly compelling and beautiful right now too, so I love how
Yeah.
these things are fitting together. More
Yeah.
concert composers are giving film music a shot, and more film composers are giving concert music a shot. So it's
Yeah.
nice to watch
Yeah.
those worlds kind of meshing and melding and breaking down some of those walls that I think were artificially established by academia over the years.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioning concerts triggered in my memory. The last couple of years here, they've had, I think it's in New York. In New York, they've done, the big, and I think there's other places too, but the ones here in the States that I notice are the ones in New York where they, do the movie screenings with the live orchestra and
That's
everything.
right, yeah. They
Um,
just announced, the next season, I don't know, last few days, I think. I've seen some ads for them.
oh, really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're adding more all the time. Lord
Yeah,
of the Rings is
yeah, they
still
keep
playing,
adding shows to it because
yeah.
it's Return of the King this year, I think, in New
Return
York.
of the King is at Radio City I think it's in February, I think. And so that's still getting around all the time. All the major
Yeah,
orchestras now are adding these film performances, and I think
yeah.
originally some of the older players would turn up their noses at them and say, "Well, this is beneath us. This isn't that good." But I think they're getting
It's
one.
good. I think they're gonna, yeah,
Well,
they're
you
definitely gonna
notice
go
when they start doing
popular.
these things, like the top players would sub these things out. So you'd go in and you kind of watch, like, well, if there's fourth chair, Freddie over there, he's playing his, everyone else, I don't know who they are. And now every time you go to one of these things, um, it's like more and more the top players,
Mm,
they're staying in town. I had like a weird experience this past spring. I had to have surgery in May. I kind of had some bad luck with health this past
mm.
spring. So I went the night before my surgery to see Close Encounters live and performance because I thought, well, that'll distract me.
Oh,
And it was the first time where I think the entire Chicago Symphony, I barely saw any subs in it.
wow.
And they're just wanting to stay and play these scores because they're
Yeah,
they're beautifully expressive. They're written well for the instruments. These these are masterful composers and orchestrators. They know how to write for a violin like a violin. They know how to write
Yeah.
for an oboe like an oboe. And so like people are starting to appreciate it. And I think we're finally getting the one thing we always lacked from the inception of film music until recently was the idea of a sort of canonic body of work. What are the classic film scores as music, not as records? It's important to have the classic records too. Classical music has that as well. But like, what are the pieces that like you should know how to play? You know,
Yeah.
what's contributed to the art of musical performance? And now we're getting that. And that's cool.
Yeah.
A lot of these like someone was telling me the other day, you want to play horn in the Boston Symphony, the audition is Ewok music.
Really?
You gotta play John Williams Ewok music from Return of the Jedi. That's the
Oh
audition.
my gosh.
So it's cool to see these things. I mean, maybe that's not the case anymore. I know it was for a while because I got my hands on the score. Like it's the Ewok. So
That's
but
awesome.
you're playing like Don Juan and Ewoks. So it's cool, you know. The world is changing.
Yeah. Well, one more question I just thought of is, okay, so I've seen like the promos and stuff for Lord of the Rings in concert, and they have the guy who's like dropping chains onto like
Yeah.
metal. What is the name? You know, what's that guy's title?
Well, it would be played by a percussionist. So I'm a percussionist. That's
Okay.
my instrument is percussion. So like anything that's not anything they don't know who else to have who else should play it. We get in the percussion section. I've played
Okay.
chains, I've played rocks, I've played flower pots, I've played wine glasses, I've played all sorts of stuff.
Wow.
So yeah, that's they take, if you can imagine, okay, inside of a piano, like an upright piano, it's like a giant frame with the piano wires stretched across it.
Yeah.
Right? So they find some old broken down upright piano and they take that element out of the piano, and a guy will put on heavy gloves just to protect himself and hold these huge metal chains and smash them against the piano wires, which
Yeah.
it's resonant but very clangorous and violent sounding. And if you do that 5 beats a measure, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, you've got Isengard. That's where you get Isengard.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that's Howard's idea of the music of industry. If the Shire and the elves and things like that represent, and goodness, the nature theme itself, that represents everything good and green in Middle Earth. That's the nature of Middle Earth. And Isengard is the industrialism, which is the most, it goes back to the root of all these early and essential Tolkien ideas of the natural world versus encroaching industrialism.
Yeah.
And so that's how he portrayed that musically. It's the sound of metal and wheels versus the sound of goodness and green.
Yeah. Oh, that's
So, yeah,
awesome.
but watch your hands. It's dangerous.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
Stop before that one.
Yeah. I just, when I saw that in the promo video, I was like, oh my gosh, that looks like that guy has like the funnest job.
Yeah,
It seems like to me, like just clanging around chains. You know, I know there's obviously it's not just clanging around chains, but like, you know, from an outsider's perspective, it's like, that looks pretty fun.
You know what the hardest part of that is? Here's a little percussion insight. The hardest part of that is picking up the stupid chains. Because no matter when you pick up a big metal chain, it starts to make noise.
Oh.
So if you're like the scene before where there's like, you know, the
like
moth
really beautiful music and you're like
soloist and you're like moving like a chain across the stage. That's the hardest thing in percussion sometimes, is to not make noise.
Wow, that's a good point. I would have never thought of that.
That's the guy's earning his pay.
He is. Oh man. That's wow. That's some good insight. Man.
Thanks.
There we go.
That's 6 years music school right there.
Well, folks, the book once again is The Music of the Lord of the Rings films. Definitely, I can't recommend this enough. This is a great book. Like I said, no matter where you are on the spectrum of like me to musically inclined music nerd, you'll get a lot out of this. It's an absolutely phenomenal book. Doug, thank you so much for not only writing the book, but for joining us here as well today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's great.
Yeah. Well, guys, again, pick up the book, Music of the Lord of the Rings films. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.